I don't even know where to begin because this whole situation feels like something out of a bad TV drama, except it's my actual life. For context, I, 32M, basically grew up inside my parents' business. While other kids were at soccer practice or going on family vacations, I was stocking shelves, sweeping floors, and later running payroll when I got old enough to understand numbers. Every memory I have from my teens is tied to that business. Birthday dinners? Spent in the back office with a slice of cake while my parents argued about profit margins. Holidays? Forget it, Christmas meant long lines of customers, and New Year's Eve meant inventory. I didn't complain, though. At the time, I thought this was my duty. My parents always told me, "One day, all of this will be yours." They said it like a promise carved in stone. So I gave up my 20s for them. I skipped college parties to handle late-night shipments. I turned down an amazing internship in another state because they said they couldn't manage without me. I kept telling myself it would all pay off, that I'd inherit something real, something worth all the sacrifices. But then came the knife in the back. Couple years ago, the business hit a rough patch. Nothing catastrophic, just the kind of dip every company goes through when the market shifts. I was working 70-hour weeks trying to stabilize things, new marketing campaigns, supplier negotiations, you name it. Meanwhile, my brother, let's call him Jake, 34M, was rolling into the office at 11 a.m., spending half the day scrolling on his phone, and somehow still being praised for sticking around. Jake has always been the golden child. He's charming, lazy as hell, but for whatever reason my parents treat him like he hung the moon. One Friday, they called me into the office. I thought maybe they were going to acknowledge my hard work. Instead, they sat me down and said, "We're letting you go. It's nothing personal, we just need to cut costs." Cut costs. That was the phrase they used as they fired their own son, the one who had been running their entire operation for years. Guess who didn't get cut? Jake, the guy who couldn't tell the difference between an invoice and a receipt. My parents said he was important for morale and family presence. I just sat there in shock, staring at them, trying to process how the people who raised me could throw me away like I was a seasonal employee. I remember walking out of that office feeling hollow. I didn't even take my things at first because I thought maybe it was some twisted joke. But nope, by Monday, my company email was gone. My name scrubbed off the staff list, and Jake was sitting in my old office chair like he'd earned it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't just jobless. I was betrayed by the very people I thought I was killing myself to help. And I promised myself right then, if I ever got the chance to rise above this, I wouldn't waste it. If you want to understand why this whole thing still burns me years later, you have to understand Jake. Jake and I couldn't be more different if we tried. Growing up, I was the kid who brought home straight A's, worked after school, and helped my parents keep the business running. Jake? He was the guy who barely passed his classes, always had some new big idea that fizzled after a week, and somehow managed to turn every failure into someone else's problem. Yet, for reasons I will never understand, my parents worshipped the ground he walked on. When Jake flunked a college class, they blamed the professor. When he quit his first real job after just 3 months, they said the company didn't recognize his talent. Meanwhile, when I landed a scholarship offer from a top university out of state, my parents' practically guilt-tripped me into declining it because the family needs you here. It was always like that. I was the workhorse, Jake was the show pony. I hauled boxes, balanced books, and dealt with screaming customers. Jake would waltz in late, smooth talk with a couple of clients, then leave early to network at the bar with his friends. And every single time, my parents would brag about how charismatic he was. At first, I didn't mind. I figured maybe that was just our dynamic. Some people are brains, others are charm. But over time, I realized Jake wasn't using his so-called charm for the business. He was using it to coast through life while I picked up his slack. One memory sticks out. We had this huge shipment issue a few years back. A supplier sent the wrong inventory, and I spent the entire night calling different warehouses, negotiating replacements, and arranging emergency trucking so our customers wouldn't leave us. I finally dragged myself home at 5 a.m., completely exhausted. The next morning, Jake strolled into the office at noon with a latte in hand, bragging about how he closed a deal with some local vendor. My parents practically threw him a parade. That deal? He got us a discount on office coffee supplies. Meanwhile, I had saved us from losing one of our biggest clients. Guess which story got told at every family gathering? I don't want to sound bitter, but this favoritism wasn't subtle. It was blinding. My dad used to say, "Jake just has that spark. You can't teach that." My mom would add, "You and Jake balance each other out. You're the serious one, he's the people person." But let's be real. What good is being a people person when you can't actually do the work that keeps the lights on? Still, I kept my mouth shut for years. I told myself, it doesn't matter who gets the praise. What matters is the business stays afloat, and one day it'll all be mine. That belief was the only thing that kept me from losing my mind when I saw Jake getting rewarded for mediocrity while I broke my back. But after they fired me and kept him, I finally understood the truth. In my parents' eyes, Jake could do no wrong. He was untouchable. It didn't matter how hard I worked or what sacrifices I made. He'd always be the golden child, and I'd always be the expendable one. And that realization hurt more than losing the job itself. The day it all went down is burned into my memory like a scar. It was a Friday afternoon, one of those weeks where everything seemed to be going wrong. Sales were sluggish, a supplier had messed up an order again, and I'd been juggling phone calls and spreadsheets nonstop. I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep across 3 days. When my parents asked me to come into the office, I figured they wanted to go over financials. I grabbed my laptop, notes in hand, ready to present some cost-cutting strategies I had been working on. Instead, I walked into a firing squad. Both my parents were sitting across from me, unusually stiff. My dad cleared his throat, which he only did when he was nervous. My mom avoided eye contact. My stomach dropped. "We need to make some hard decisions," my dad started, his voice flat. "The business can't sustain the current payroll. We've decided we have to let you go." I thought I misheard him. I laughed, a short, awkward chuckle, waiting for him to crack a smile. He didn't. "Wait, you're serious?" I asked. "You're firing me?" My mom finally spoke, her voice soft, almost rehearsed. "It's not personal. You've been amazing, but the business just can't afford both of you boys right now." "Both of us?" I repeated, blinking. "So you're letting Jake go too?" Silence. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom's eyes flickered toward the door like she was waiting for someone to rescue her. That's when it hit me. "You're keeping him," I said, my voice shaking. "You're firing me and keeping Jake?" My dad sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "Jake has a different kind of value. He connects with people. Customers like him." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I wanted to scream. Jake couldn't even spell invoice correctly, but apparently, he was too valuable to cut. Meanwhile, the guy who had practically been running the company, was disposable. I asked them how they could do this to me after everything I had sacrificed. I reminded them of the nights I slept in the office, the vacations I missed, the relationships I lost because I was always on call for their dream. My mom's eyes welled up like she was sorry, but she didn't stop it. My dad just repeated the same cold line. "It's business, not personal." Business. That word rattled around in my head. How could it not be personal? They weren't just my bosses, they were my parents. If a stranger had fired me, maybe I could have brushed it off. But having my own family sit me down and discard me like I was some extra expense on a balance sheet, that was a whole different kind of pain. I walked out in a daze. My office key felt heavy in my pocket. Every step through the building, I passed people I had trained, employees who looked at me with confusion as I carried out a box of my things. Some of them whispered, "What happened?" I didn't have an answer. When I got home that night, I sat in the dark, staring at the wall. I kept thinking about all the years I'd given them, all the birthdays, dates, and friendships I sacrificed. For what? To be told I wasn't worth the cost of keeping? The bitterness started that night. It wasn't just losing my job. It was realizing my parents chose my brother over me. They always had, but now there was no denying it. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I promised myself, if I ever got the chance to rise above this, I wouldn't just succeed. I'd make sure they knew exactly what they'd thrown away. The weeks after getting fired were a blur. At first, I kept telling myself it was temporary, that my parents would realize their mistake, call me back, and we'd all laugh about the misunderstanding. I checked my phone obsessively, waiting for that call. It never came. Instead, Jake started posting pictures on social media from my office. My office chair, my desk, my nameplate replaced with his. He'd caption things like, CEO in training or big boss moves, as if he hadn't just inherited everything I worked for. My parents even commented on his posts with little heart emojis and, so proud of you, son. I swear each like was another dagger. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a one-bedroom apartment surrounded by half-packed boxes of my life from the office, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. I thought about calling some of the suppliers or clients I had built relationships with, but pride stopped me. What would I even say? Hey, my parents fired me. Any chance you'll throw me a pity job? No thanks. So I applied to regular jobs. Hundreds of them. I had experience, but my resume looked weird. 10 years in a family business doesn't exactly scream transferable skills to hiring managers. The interviews I did land always felt the same. Polite smiles, a few questions about why I left the business, then the classic, we'll be in touch. They never were. Money got tight. I went from having a steady paycheck to living off my savings, which drained faster than I expected. I had to sell my car, cancel subscriptions, cut back on groceries. There were nights I went to bed with just ramen and a headache, wondering how I'd fallen so far so fast. And the mental toll? Brutal. I'd wake up late because I had nowhere to be. The days blurred together. Sometimes I'd just sit on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying that office meeting in my head. I kept hearing my dad's voice. It's business, not personal. Except it was personal. Every second of it was personal. There were nights I cried, not out of sadness, but out of pure frustration. How could I give my whole life to something, only to be tossed aside like trash? I felt worthless, unwanted, like all those sacrifices meant nothing. I avoided family gatherings. My parents invited me once for dinner after things had cooled down, but I couldn't stomach it. Jake would be there, bragging about his company, while my parents beamed with pride. No thanks. Instead, I sat home alone, scrolling through job boards until my eyes burned. I started doubting myself. Maybe I wasn't as valuable as I thought. Maybe Jake really did have something I didn't. Maybe I had wasted my life chasing something that was never meant to be mine. That was rock bottom for me. Not just being broke, but questioning my entire identity. Because for so long, the business wasn't just my job, it was who I was. Without it, I felt like nothing. But funny enough, that same emptiness is what forced me to change. Because once you lose everything, you realize you have nothing left to lose. And that's when I decided, if the world wasn't going to hand me a second chance, I'd build one myself. Hitting rock bottom hurt, but in a strange way it cleared the fog. When you've already lost everything, fear loses its grip on you. That realization is what pushed me to stop wallowing and start moving. One night, I was scrolling through job postings again when I saw a listing for a junior operations role at a mid-sized company in the same industry as my parents' business. The pay wasn't great, and on paper I was massively overqualified, but something inside me said, apply anyway. I figured the worst they could do was ignore me, something I was used to at that point. To my surprise, they called me in for an interview. I remember sitting in that conference room across from the hiring manager, feeling like a fraud. I had been running payrolls and managing supplier contracts for years, yet here I was applying for a position barely above entry level. But instead of being embarrassed, I leaned into it. I told them the truth. I've done every single job you could imagine in a family business, from scrubbing toilets to negotiating six-figure deals. I'm not afraid of hard work. I just need a chance to prove myself outside of my family's shadow. For the first time, someone actually listened. I got the job. Starting over at the bottom was humbling, but also liberating. No one there saw me as the boss's kid. No one expected me to sacrifice my life for family loyalty. I was just another employee, and oddly enough, that felt like freedom. The early months were tough. I was older than most people in my department, and my pride took a hit answering to managers who were younger than me. But I kept my head down, worked hard, and made it clear I wasn't there to coast. When a problem came up, I didn't just point it out. I solved it. When someone was drowning in paperwork, I stayed late to help. I became the guy people could rely on, and slowly people noticed. That's when I met Mark, the operations director. He pulled me aside one day and said, "You've got the instincts of someone who's run things before. Don't sell yourself short." That was the first time since getting fired that anyone had validated my worth. He became a mentor, teaching me how corporate structures worked, things my parents' small business never exposed me to. Over the next couple of years, I climbed the ladder. I went from junior operations to team lead, then project manager. Each promotion felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. And the best part? Every accomplishment was mine alone. No family favoritism, no parents pulling strings. Just me and the work I put in. Along the way, I built relationships with suppliers and clients, many of whom remembered me from my parents' company. Some even said things like, "You were the only one who ever got things done over there." That fueled me more than I can explain. It wasn't about money anymore, it was about respect. About proving to myself that I wasn't worthless, that I had value outside of my parents' warped favoritism. And then, one day, an opportunity opened that would change everything. A leadership role at a competitor. A company that had always been a thorn in my parents' side. They were looking for someone to modernize their operations. Mark recommended me personally. When the offer letter hit my inbox, I stared at it for a long time. This wasn't just a job. This was my shot at leveling the playing field. I accepted without hesitation. Walking into the offices of my parents' biggest competitor for the first time felt surreal. For years, I'd heard their name spoken like a curse in my household. My dad used to spit the word like it was poison. "They're vultures. They'd eat us alive if they had the chance." My mom would shake her head and mutter about how they don't understand family loyalty. And now I was wearing their badge, shaking hands with their executives, and being introduced as the guy who was going to help modernize their entire operation. The irony wasn't lost on me. First, I kept my head down. I didn't want anyone thinking I was there for revenge. I wanted to earn my place the same way I always had, through results. The company had been struggling with outdated systems, slow supply chains, and constant bottlenecks. It was basically the same mess I'd cleaned up at my parents' business 100 times. The difference? Here, I had the resources and authority to actually fix things. I dove in headfirst. Within 6 months, we'd cut processing times in half. Supplier costs dropped thanks to renegotiated contracts. Customer satisfaction climbed. And people noticed. My name started getting mentioned in board meetings. I was asked to present directly to the executives. Then, out of nowhere, I was offered a senior operations manager role. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to be valued not because of family ties, but because of actual skill. And the crazy part? I loved it. I thrived on the pressure, the long hours, the challenge of fixing something broken. But unlike with my parents' company, I wasn't being taken for granted. Here, my work translated into promotions, raises, and, most importantly, respect. I also started building a reputation in the industry. Suppliers who had known me from my parents' business started reaching out. Clients remembered me as the reliable one. Some even hinted that they preferred dealing with me over my family. I didn't rub it in, but I filed it away in the back of my mind. Then came the moment I knew I had truly arrived. At a regional trade show, I ran into my parents. They were there with Jake, who was parading around in a suit 2 sizes too flashy, handing out business cards like candy. My parents spotted me across the floor, standing at my new company's booth with a line of clients waiting to talk to me. The look on their faces. Shock followed by something else, fear. We exchanged stiff hellos, but the energy was different now. I wasn't the discarded son anymore. I wasn't the expendable worker they had tossed aside to save a few bucks. I was competition. That night, lying in my hotel room, I couldn't stop thinking about it. For years, they had all the power. They could fire me, belittle me, replace me. But now, the playing field had shifted. For the first time, I had leverage. And little did I know, their empire, the one they chose Jake to inherit, was already starting to crack. The first whispers reached me through the grapevine. A supplier I'd worked with in the past casually mentioned over coffee, "Hey, did you hear your parents' company has been behind on payments lately?" I brushed it off at first. Businesses have cash flow issues all the time. But then another supplier hinted the same thing. Then a former client told me they'd switched to another vendor because Jake had dropped the ball on a big order. That's when I realized it wasn't just rumors. It was the beginning of a slide. The signs were everywhere once I started paying attention. Their delivery times were slipping. Their reviews online were harsher than ever. Employees I still knew from the old days started reaching out, asking if my company was hiring. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell. Morale was tanking, and people were jumping ship before it sank. And at the center of it all, Jake. From what I gathered, he'd been promoted into a leadership role he had no business holding. My parents treated him like some visionary, when in reality he was just making one reckless decision after another. He overextended credit lines to fund expansions that weren't sustainable. He poured money into flashy marketing campaigns that attracted the wrong clientele. He even tried to innovate by cutting corners with suppliers, which only backfired when product quality dropped. Meanwhile, my parents clung to the belief that Jake could do no wrong. They defended him at every turn, even as the walls started closing in. To outsiders, they projected confidence. But inside the industry, people could smell the blood in the water. I wasn't gloating, at least not outwardly. But I won't lie, part of me felt vindicated. For years I had warned them about Jake's lack of discipline, his habit of chasing shiny objects instead of building stability. They didn't listen. Now they were paying the price. What really struck me, though, was how fast it all unraveled. One quarter, they were still being invited to big networking events. By the next, they were noticeably absent. A client who had been loyal for decades shifted their account to my new company, citing better reliability. Then another followed. I didn't actively poach them, but I didn't turn them away either. Behind the scenes, I started hearing about unpaid loans and rising debt. My parents had apparently mortgaged part of their property to cover operational costs. It was like watching someone try to plug holes in a sinking ship with duct tape. No matter what they did, the water kept pouring in. The final nail came when a major supplier cut ties after Jake tried to strong-arm them into extending credit terms. Instead of negotiating, he threatened them. They walked away, and without that supplier, the business lost a critical lifeline. I'll never forget the day I saw Jake's smug grin start to crack. At another trade event, he approached a group of clients, trying his usual charm routine. But this time, they brushed him off. One of them even came straight to me afterward and said, "We gave your brother enough chances. We're done." That was the moment I knew the collapse wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. And soon, the same parents who once told me, "It's business, not personal," were about to come crawling back, asking for help. The call came late on a Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer when I saw my mom's name flash across the screen. We hadn't spoken in months, and when we did, the conversations were stiff, polite, and shallow. But something in me said to pick up. Her voice was shaky. "Can you come over tomorrow? Your father and I need to talk to you." I showed up the next day, more out of curiosity than anything. Walking into my parents' house felt strange, like stepping back into a world I no longer belonged to. The business plaques still lined the walls, family photos mixed with company awards. But everything felt smaller somehow, like the shine had worn off. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where countless family arguments about the business had once taken place. Only this time, the tone was different. My dad looked older, beaten down. My mom's hands trembled as she poured coffee. And Jake? He wasn't there. My dad cleared his throat. "The business is in trouble." I bit back the urge to say I know. Instead, I just nodded, letting him talk. He went on about declining sales, suppliers backing out, debts piling up. His voice cracked when he admitted they were weeks away from defaulting on a major loan. My mom chimed in, saying they'd tried everything, but nothing worked. Finally, she looked me in the eye and said, "We need you. Please, come back and help us." For a moment, I just sat there in silence. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even triumph. This was the exact scenario I had fantasized about during those nights I sat alone, broke and angry. My parents humbled, their empire crumbling, me holding the power. But what I actually felt was disbelief. These are the same people who tossed me out like garbage, I thought. The same ones who said it was just business. And now they expect me to swoop in and fix everything? Out loud, I asked, "What about Jake?" My dad sighed. "He's trying, but he's not ready for this level of responsibility." Translation: Jake screwed up, and now they wanted me to clean up his mess. My mom leaned forward, tears in her eyes. "You've always been the reliable one. You're the only person who can save us." That line hit me harder than I expected. The reliable one. That's all I ever was to them, reliable. Never the favorite, never the chosen one. Just the one they could depend on until they decided I was too expensive. I asked them what they were actually offering. A title? Equity? Control? My dad dodged the question, saying we could work out the details later. My mom said, "This isn't about money, it's about family." That word, family, nearly made me laugh. Where was family when they shoved me out the door? Where was family when they let Jake play CEO while I struggled to pay rent? I told them I needed time to think. As I left their house, I felt a storm of emotions. Anger, pity, satisfaction, even guilt. But under all of it was a single, crystal-clear truth. This was my moment. For the first time, they needed me more than I needed them. And I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to save them or watch them drown. For a week, I wrestled with the decision. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying their words. "We need you." Part of me wanted to give in, to rush back and prove, once again, that I was the dependable son who could shoulder everything. That's what I'd always done. But another part of me, the part that remembered sitting in that office hearing, "We're letting you go," kept whispering, "Don't forget. Don't let them use you again." At work, I kept the situation to myself, but apparently the industry already knew. Word travels fast when a once stable company starts circling the drain. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. "We're considering an acquisition," he said plainly. "Your parents' company." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected it so soon. "They're weak," he continued. "Debts, bad leadership, bad press. We can either let them collapse and scoop up their clients afterward, or buy them out while there's still something salvageable. But here's the thing, we'd want you to lead the transition. You know their operations inside and out." I just sat there, silent. My mind was spinning. On one hand, this was the perfect revenge. The poetic justice of the son they fired becoming the one who absorbed their company into its biggest rival. On the other hand, it was brutal. My parents weren't strangers, they were still my family. That night, I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. The birthdays I missed, the friends I lost, the relationships I let slip away. I thought about Jake sitting smugly in my chair while I sat broke in my apartment. I thought about my dad's cold voice saying, "It's business, not personal." And slowly, my guilt hardened into resolve. If they taught me anything, it was that business comes first. They fired me to cut costs. They chose Jake because he made them feel good, not because he was competent. They told me it wasn't personal. Fine. I could play by those rules too. So when my boss asked me for my answer, I didn't hesitate. "Do it," I said. "Acquire them. I'll handle the rest." The following months were a blur of paperwork, negotiations, and strategy meetings. I kept my emotions out of it. I wasn't acting as their son. I was acting as a professional, making the best move for my company. But inside, I knew what this really was, the final shift in power. The day the deal was finalized, I drove past my parents' office, the same building where I had spent most of my life. The company logo was already being swapped out for ours. Employees were being briefed about the merger. And Jake? He wasn't smiling anymore. Later, I heard he'd been offered a token position but refused out of pride. My parents were livid, humiliated, scrambling to adjust to their new reality. And me? I walked into my new office, their old territory, and sat down in the chair they once told me I didn't deserve. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't even revenge. It was closure. For once, I wasn't the expendable one. I was the one holding all the cards. It's been a few months since the acquisition was finalized. And honestly, things are surreal. The family business, once the source of my entire life, is now part of my competitor. The employees who used to scowl at me as just the kid are now following my lead. I make the decisions. I set the strategy. I run the operations. And every time I walk past what used to be my parents' office, I feel a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. My parents haven't spoken to me much. When they do, it's strained, awkward. My mom still tries to guilt me with lines like, "We only ever wanted what was best for you." My dad remains stoic, occasionally glaring at me as if his silent judgment could reverse the merger. Jake, well, he's floundering. He refused a minor role in the merged company out of pride, and now he's scrambling to find something else. Funny enough, he started calling me for advice, calls I don't return. People around me tell me I'm ruthless, that I've taken revenge too far. Part of me wonders if they're right. After all, I didn't just let the business collapse. I actively led the acquisition. I didn't offer my parents a chance to redeem themselves. I seized the opportunity for myself. But then I remember all the years I sacrificed for them, all the times I gave up my life while they coddled Jake, all the moments I was told my work wasn't enough. This wasn't just business, it was personal, whether they like it or not. They made their choice. I'm just following through on mine. I've also realized something else. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about justice. They treated me as expendable, and for the first time, they've had a glimpse of what that feels like. They've had to face the consequences of their decisions. And strangely, that feels fair. I won't lie. There's a part of me that misses my old life, before betrayal, before revenge. I wonder if this makes me cruel. I wonder if I should have just helped them, restored the family business, and put aside the past. But then I think about all those nights I spent alone, all the sacrifices I made that were never acknowledged, and I remember why I didn't. So here I am, sitting in my new office, looking at the empire I've built. Not just for myself, but on the ruins of the one that cast me aside. And I have to ask, AITA, I feel justified, but I also feel the weight of my choices. I didn't just rise above them, I eclipsed them. I wonder if there's a line between justice and cruelty, and if I crossed it. I want to hear what strangers think, because no one in my life can give me an unbiased answer. Was I right to put my parents in the position they put me in all those years ago? Or did I go too far? Because for the first time in my life, the power is mine, and I'm still questioning if that makes me the bad guy.